Riverside, Ohio, a small town that always seemed too quiet, too safe. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved at every neighbor on the street. A town where no one ever thought evil could walk among them, but evil has a way of hiding in silence. Margaret lived here, in a little white house with blue shutters and a garden that never seemed to stop blooming. She wasn't rich. She wasn't powerful. She was just a nurse, tired hands, soft eyes, and a mother. Her daughter, Anna, was her entire world. Anna was 22, young, bold, and bursting with talent. She could paint the sunrise like it was alive. She dreamed of one day opening her own art gallery, and she believed in beauty, even when the world was cruel. Every morning was the same in their home. Margaret frying eggs and pouring coffee. Anna at the kitchen window with her sketchbook. Laughter between them turned that little house into something brighter, something bigger. It felt unbreakable. Until the night it broke. It was a Wednesday night. Anna told her mother she was going to a party with her classmates. Don't wait up, she smiled, though she knew her mother always would. Hours passed. Midnight. 1 o'clock. The clock ticked louder in Margaret's kitchen. She tried to read. She tried to pray. But every shadow outside felt like a warning. She called Anna once, twice, 10 times. The phone just rang and rang. By 3 in the morning. Margaret was standing at the window, her breath fogging the glass, staring down the empty street. A mother knows when something has gone wrong. She could feel it twisting inside her chest. Then came the knock at the door. 2 police officers stood there, their faces heavy. One of them spoke words that shattered her world forever. Anna had been found in an abandoned parking lot. There had been an assault. She hadn't survived. At the hospital, Margaret held her daughter's cold hand and begged for a miracle. But miracles didn't come that night. Only silence. The funeral was small. Neighbors came with flowers, but their eyes couldn't meet hers. Because everyone already knew the system wasn't going to fight for Anna. The police called it complicated. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses fell silent. Files were misplaced, and Margaret began to hear a name whispered everywhere, in grocery stores, in the church parking lot, even in the hospital hallways. Richard Kane, a businessman. A donor, a man whose money was heavier than the law. At first, Margaret drowned in grief. She sat for hours in Anna's room, clutching her daughter's sketchbook, breathing in the faint smell of her perfume. But grief has a way of turning into something else. One night, Margaret opened Anna's phone. She scrolled through her messages, her emails, her diary. And then she found it, an argument. Just days before her death, Anna had confronted Kane's son. It was the first thread. And once Margaret pulled at it, the whole world began to unravel. She wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. She was a storm waiting to break. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. Margaret sat in a cold metal chair, staring at the lifeless hand of her daughter. Anna's fingers, once stained with paint and charcoal, now pale and still. Machines had already gone silent, but Margaret couldn't let go. She whispered prayers that dissolved into sobs, her voice echoing in the sterile room. By morning, she was a mother without a child. Riverside gathered, as small towns do, with flowers and casseroles and awkward embraces. Anna's classmates placed sketches beside her coffin, torn pages of her art, filled with colors of dreams she'd never lived to paint. But the silence in the church wasn't just grief. It was fear. People looked away when Margaret's eyes met theirs. They whispered, but never loud enough for her to hear. Only one name slipped through those whispers. Like a shadow, Richard Kane. Margaret clutched a folder of funeral cards when she walked into the Riverside Police Department. Her face was drained, her voice trembling but determined. My daughter was murdered, she told the officer at the front desk. I need to know what you're doing about it. The officer barely glanced up. Ma'am, the investigation is ongoing. Then why haven't you called me? Why haven't you arrested anyone? The officer sighed. We don't comment on open cases. Margaret's heart pounded. She was 22 years old. She had a life. You owe me answers. People in the lobby turned to stare, but no one came closer. The officer simply repeated the same phrase. It's complicated. Complicated. That was their word for her daughter's death. Days turned into weeks. Margaret called daily. Each time the detectives had new excuses. Evidence was missing, lab results delayed, witnesses refusing to talk. Finally, one night, she cornered Detective Harlan, the man assigned to the case. His eyes were cold, his tie loose, his voice tired. We're doing what we can, he said. No, you're not, Margaret snapped. You've lost files, you've silenced witnesses, and you think I don't see it? You think because she was black, because we're not powerful, you can just close the book? Harlan's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He simply muttered, You should go home, Mrs. White, for your own good. The way he said it wasn't concern. It was a warning. Margaret drove home in the dark, her hands trembling on the wheel. Riverside wasn't the peaceful town she thought it was. The police weren't guardians. They were gatekeepers, protecting someone powerful enough to bury her daughter's truth. And still, in every corner shop and diner, she heard the same name in low voices, Richard Kane, a man whose money dripped into the pockets of politicians, officers, maybe even the very detective who told her to go home. At night, sitting in Anna's room, Margaret whispered to the sketchbook on her daughter's desk, If they won't fight for you, I will. Her tears had dried. Her grief was hardening into resolve. The silent police had chosen their side. Now, Margaret knew she had to choose hers. Nights were the hardest stop. Margaret would sit in Anna's room long after midnight, the walls still carrying the faint smell of paint and lavender. The sketchbook lay on the desk, half open, its pages filled with unfinished drawings, frozen dreams of a girl who believed in color even when the world was. Pray dot, she traced the pencil lines with trembling fingers, whispering, I won't let them erase you. It was 2 weeks after the funeral when Margaret finally unlocked Anna's phone. Her hands shook as if she were trespassing, but grief had left her no choice. She scrolled through messages, emails, calendar notes, anything that could tell her what happened that night. Most texts were ordinary, group chats about classes, parties, assignments. But then she found a heated exchange. Anna's words sharp, angry. Her last argument was with Ethan Kane, Richard Kane's son. Margaret read the messages again and again, her breath quickening. Anna had accused him of using his father's influence to silence a friend, a girl who had been harassed. Ethan's reply was smug, cruel. Nobody cares what you think. My dad can bury anything. 3 days later, Anna was dead. Margaret started walking through Riverside differently. At the grocery store, people stopped talking when she passed. At the diner, conversations dropped to whispers. One afternoon, she noticed a black car idling at the corner near her house. Windows tinted, engine humming. She stared at it from her porch until it rolled away, slow, deliberate. Was it real? Or was grief making her paranoid? But deep inside, she knew. Kane's reach was everywhere. And now she had touched a thread of his web. That night, Margaret sat at her kitchen table with a notepad. She wrote down everything. Anna's argument with Ethan, the police's sudden silence, the missing autopsy details, the name Richard Kane, circled over and over in black ink. Every note was a reminder. This wasn't random violence. It was a crime protected by power, Doc, she whispered into the quiet kitchen. They think they can scare me. They think I'll stop asking. But I'm not afraid anymore. Her fear was burning away, replaced by something sharper purpose. The next morning, Margaret walked into the library, not as a mother in mourning, but as a woman on a mission. She dug through old newspaper archives, city records, business deals dot and everywhere, like a stain spreading across the pages. The same name appeared: Richard Kane. Contracts, donations, quiet settlements. The man wasn't just powerful. He was untouchable, but Margaret had already made a promise at her daughter's grave. If no one else will fight, I will. And a mother with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous enemy of all. Riverside woke one morning to chaos. Headlines splashed across the local paper. Margaret stood at her kitchen counter, the newspaper trembling in her hands. She had slipped those files, contracts, and forged signatures to Daniel Reed the night before, under the cover of darkness. Now her enemy's name was smeared across every doorstep in town. For the first time since Anna's death, Margaret felt power shift, but with power came danger. The phone rang that night. A voice, deep, calm, venomous, whispered, "Stay quiet, or you'll join your daughter." Margaret gripped the receiver until her knuckles turned white. She didn't respond. She simply hung up and stared at the photo of Anna taped to the fridge. Fear clawed at her stomach. But Anna's smile hardened her resolve. Detective Harlan had buried Anna's autopsy report. Margaret knew it. Daniel had confirmed through a source at the hospital. One rainy evening, Margaret broke into Harlan's office. Her hands shook as she rifled through drawers, the ticking clock pounding in her ears. And then she found it. A small black ledger filled with deposits. Money funneled from Kane's companies straight into Harlan's account. By morning, Daniel had it in print. The town erupted. Corrupt cop exposed. Harlan was forced to resign. One protector down. Weeks earlier, a woman had testified she saw nothing unusual in the parking lot the night Anna was attacked. But Margaret dug deeper. She confronted the woman outside the supermarket, neighbors watching as Margaret's voice cut like glass. "Tell them how much Kane paid you. Tell them what you sold my daughter's life for." The woman broke. In tears, she admitted she'd been given envelopes of cash to lie. By nightfall, half the town knew. Kane's wall was crumbling. The biggest shield of all was Sheriff Donnelly. He'd dismissed Anna's case as low priority, but Margaret and Daniel uncovered his secret. Land deals signed directly with Kane. Daniel's exposed dropped like a bomb. Sheriff in Kane's pocket. Margaret sat in her living room, listening to the radio as callers demanded the sheriff's resignation. For the first time, she heard voices of the town rise for Anna, not against her, but victory came with a price. One night, Margaret pulled into her driveway and saw it. Her front porch light shattered, glass crunching under her shoes. On the doorframe, someone had carved one word into the wood. "Stop." Her hands trembled as she touched the carving. But instead of breaking, she whispered into the night, "No." One by one, Kane's empire of silence was collapsing. The detective gone. The false witness exposed. The sheriff disgraced, and at the center of the storm stood Margaret, a mother armed with nothing but truth, rage, and the memory of her daughter. For the first time, Kane himself was vulnerable, and he knew exactly who was coming for him. The courthouse steps had never seen such a crowd. Reporters clustered with microphones, cameras flashing like lightning. Curious townspeople filled the sidewalks, their whispers weaving through the crisp autumn air. Everyone had heard the rumors. Kane's empire was cracking. But no one expected the spot at the center stood Margaret, her black coat whipped in the wind, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, but her stance was unshakable. In her hands, she clutched Anna's sketchbook, its worn cover pressed to her chest like armor. Daniel leaned close. "Are you ready?" Margaret's voice was low, steady. "I've been ready since the night they took her." She stepped up to the microphone. For a heartbeat, her throat closed. The crowd blurred. She could almost hear Anna's laugh in the wind, see her sitting with a pencil smudge on her cheek. Then Margaret spoke. Daughter's name was Anna. She was 22 years old. She loved painting, she loved music, and she believed in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Her voice cracked, but she pressed on, stronger. She was not a file to be misplaced. She was not a case to be buried. She was my child, and Richard Kane thought his money could erase her. But today, the truth speaks louder than his money. The crowd stirred, murmurs rising. Cameras clicked. Kane's name hung in the air like smoke. Daniel stepped forward and held up a thick folder. These are bank records. Transfers from Kane's companies to law enforcement officers. This, he held up photographs, shows the cover-up at every level. And here, his voice sharpened. Our messages between Kane's son and Anna, proof she was targeted because she refused to stay silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions. The storm had broken wide open, and then, as if summoned by the chaos, a sleek black car rolled to a stop at the edge of the square. Out stepped Richard Kane, tall, impeccably dressed, his jaw tight with fury. For a moment, the crowd fell into stunned silence. Kane walked forward, flanked by his lawyers, his eyes locking onto Margaret. Enough of this circus, he sneered, his voice carrying. You're destroying my reputation with lies. Margaret didn't flinch. She lifted Anna's sketchbook high, her voice cutting through the square. The only lie here is that you thought you could silence us. My daughter is gone, but her voice lives here in every page, in every dream you tried to kill. And today, the world sees you for what you are. Daniel handed the evidence to federal agents waiting at the edge of the crowd. The moment their hands touched the folder, it was over. The agents turned to Kane. Richard Kane, you're under federal investigation. You'll come with us. Gasps, shouts, cameras exploding in flashes. Kane's face twisted, the mask of power cracking as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Margaret stood still, her chest heaving. For the first time, she felt Anna beside her, not in grief, but in triumph. Days later, Kane's arrest dominated national news. Federal investigations dug deeper than even Margaret imagined. Fraud, bribery, violence. His empire rotted from within. Margaret returned to the cemetery. She laid Anna's sketchbook gently on the grave, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Baby, she whispered, her voice soft, steady. They can't silence you anymore. The world knows your name. And I kept my promise. You have justice. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't only of sorrow. They were of release, of peace. As she turned and walked away, she was no longer just a grieving mother. She was something more, a woman who had fought the impossible fight and won.